All right, that should be working now. Can you guys hear me? All right, there we go. I'm using a webcam for audio, and I forgot to add it to the stream, so it should be good now. Perfect. Thanks, guys. So, yeah, I'm not sure how long this stream's going to go on for, but over the past few months, a lot of people have kind of asked about my process and how I take pics and how I edit, and I have said for a while now that I do something and just kind of explain what I do. So that's what this is. And yes, Candy, I am talking. Ain't it a shocker? So just a few things first. This is on the PC. The program up here is Adobe Lightroom. I do have the paid version, which is why I can use it on PC. But this is available for free on Android and iPhone. And it's super powerful and just really will help you get what you're looking for if you have that vision for the photo that you took. 1 second, Susan, I'll type it. So on your phones, I very rarely use the computer version. So bear with me if I'm trying to find something. The majority of what I do is all on my phone, which is what I take all of my pictures and videos with. I use almost no macro lenses, zoom lenses, wide angles, any of those. 99.5% of all of my pictures are with no lens, just an iPhone XR, which isn't even the top of the line for the 10s. So if you have a newer phone, you are capable of taking all of these pictures. And hopefully with a little help, I can get you there. And also, let me say hi to everyone in the chat. Thanks for joining us. Looks like we got 6 people here. Hit the like button if you don't mind. So I guess where I probably should start is with just taking the picture to begin with. One thing that is the most important is to get into focus, you know, the true part of the picture that is the most interesting and fascinating, and probably what caught your eye to begin with. Whether it was the lighting, the contrast, the color, the framing of things around it, background, etc. You don't need to take a million pictures. Usually if I see something, I'm taking between 1 to 3. That's what works for me. Some photographers like to take a whole bunch so that they make sure that they got it. I'll usually place several focal points if I take multiple shots. On your camera phone, that can be accomplished by clicking at whatever you want exactly to be in focus. Depending on the app for the camera, you can hold down and it'll lock the focus to that specific spot. One big thing too that most people don't realize is in some ways we have huge advantages using a phone camera over a real camera. The focal distance, the minimum focal distance for a phone camera is as short as 4 to 6 inches away from the lens. That's how I'm able to do a lot of the macro shots I'm able to do without a lot of distortion and not having to use specific macro lenses. I do not ever use the zoom for still photos. You want to do all that in post-production, which would be using the Adobe Lightroom. The other thing that's a huge help is adjusting the exposure sometimes. And this is not a complicated thing. Again, usually what you want to do on a phone camera is click for your focus. That box will appear. And then usually it's to the right of that. If you slide up or down on the screen, it'll adjust your focus, or not focus. It'll adjust your brightness or your exposure, depending on what the program is. That allows you to kind of limit how much light is being taken in by the lens. And if it's a really, really bright environment, you probably want to turn that down so that the whites aren't blowing out all of your colors and pastels. If it's really dark, you may want to up it, but you definitely want to keep in mind that you don't. Let me show you a blown out picture here. Of course, it's like not working correctly now. Give me a moment here. I'm going to close this and reopen it. Bear with me a moment here, guys. Connor, she probably will at some point. She's sitting here staring at me, talking to myself right now. Okay. So, see you later, Susan, and I'll try. If not, I'll make it available to you somehow. Okay, so this picture here, let me just go back and see if I can reset it. Of course, I don't know how to necessarily do that in the desktop version, but it shouldn't be too hard. Okay. Now here's the original before I edited anything, and that graininess, if it's coming through at all, means you're overexposed. Your brightness is too high, and yeah, it's never going to create a crisp, beautiful shot. You can kind of get artistic with it with some of the crazier editing, but again, this is what you want to avoid. You don't want to take a picture, think you have it, and then go to work on it later and end up with a grainy mess like this. Hey, Jesse, thanks for joining us. Hey, Larry D, thanks for joining, man. All right, so we pretty much covered taking the picture. You can use most apps. The built-in one is totally acceptable. I personally like to use the one that is available within Adobe Lightroom itself, but it's totally not necessary. But once you later on get into those times when you really want the extra fine adjustments to really bring certain aspects out, it's nice having it in there in raw format. But otherwise, you can just import it and then begin working and go from there. All right, so yesterday I went to Santa Cruz and I took all sorts of pics, and I figured, hey, you know what? This might not be a bad time to go through it. A few of the ones I already edited. This is a tea tree oil blossom. Not a tea as in you drink, but in as like tea tree oil, which is all the rage right now. Basically, it looked pretty similar to that before editing. You know, it's a very pretty picture, but it's nothing super special. Obviously, you can kind of tell I was mainly interested in this flower here. Made sure that it's in focus, that my shadow was not encroaching on the area of focus, and also that the background was pretty decent, right? If I took this from a slightly different angle, and this is an urban area, I could end up with an ugly building, sidewalk, or something like that that may be kind of hard to get rid of and may end up detracting from the picture. So now that we're at this point, I guess probably the best thing to explain is the differences in the version I'm using, the PC version, and in the version that is on the desktop. And the version that is free on the phone. What you see on the right here, this bar, these sliders are all the adjustments that we're going to go through. On the phone version, they would be underneath down here. And for the most part, they work exactly the same, but occasionally on this version, I've noticed that like stuff kind of seems grayed out until or isn't even shown until you use some of the other options first. All right, so let's go with a new pick for these. So again, you can kind of see there's not nice parts of this pick here, but I made sure I had the background that would look pretty nice. There's some nice contrast. I'm gonna have some nice brightness areas, some nice darkness, and even some other things that are in focus other than the primary target, help add some flavor to the picture. So let's go through. I usually start with cropping. I'm gonna select this little kind of, looks like 2 right angles with arrows on it. And this will be where we start. I'm not sure where the option is in here, but in the phone, it's much easier to select different common ratios for the photo size. I do a lot of Instagram, so generally I aim for just 1:1, so square photos. Just because it makes the presentation really easy. But occasionally, you want a rectangle or something along those lines. So right now, I'm just limiting my field of view down to where I want. Generally, the best rule of thumb to start out with is direct center for what you have in focus. But sometimes it's really nice to also just get it a little slightly off center, and it can kind of add some interest to it occasionally. It looks like down here. I'm not gonna mess with it. I'll just do it manually. All right, so I'm not going to overthink this. I'm just going to try and get something going here for us. You generally don't want to smush to the exact side. You want to leave a little bit of a border, but we'll start for there. And then there's usually a check mark someplace when you're done. Of course, I can't find it. Right, hit enter. All right, so now we've got this cropped into our area. I mean, even already you can start to see the difference. The vision that you have for the shot should help you make all these decisions. And the slider bars that we're going to use from now on are really, it helps if you already have an idea of what you're trying to create. The picture you take before editing is never going to be what you have in your mind's eye of what you actually saw. So trying to get the picture back to that point is what I'm usually trying to do. And hey, Angie and Pam, thanks for joining. Okay, so first off, I usually, after doing my crop, I like to go to my lighting. This is basically gonna let us balance out the exposure, the contrast, the highlights, the shadows, the whites, and the blacks. Generally, I almost always will lower the exposure, at the very least by a small amount. But you can see as I'm dragging it, it's actually going to give me a preview of what's happening. And so you can really experiment here and go for, you know, even if you don't have that vision, you can really see what's possible. Everyone has their own style. My editing style generally follows a trend usually, and you guys will kind of see that right now. All right, so I'm going to lower the exposure a little bit, bump the contrast by a small amount. Next thing I'm going to do, and generally but not always, you want your blacks to be as black as possible. People who have really big screen TVs know this. You know, there was that hunt for that black in TV screens, right? Because it really just, it resonates and it's dramatic. So already, because it started out as a pretty bright picture, I'm going to lower the blacks. We're going to go about there. This area is pretty dark. I'm going to try and get that out. Usually I would probably lower the shadows a little bit, but in this case I may actually raise it just to bring some of that detail back into this area around here. For whites, again, generally, unless it's a very, very bright picture, you want to go positive just as you would want to go negative for the blacks. Just really make those highlights pop. Highlights for this picture, it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. It's getting really bright here and starting to blow out. So sometimes it's actually good to lower that. Just kind of like shadows. Generally, I do go negative, but in certain pictures, it does make sense to try the other side. So lighting-wise, we're going to just start there. It's not my favorite, but it works for right now. Next section is going to be the color here. You need to be really careful. Generally, different cameras are going to have different, I don't know, really want to call it color profiles, but the way they capture the image is going to give you a different starting point than someone with a slightly different camera, the actual hardware that's capturing it. So what works for me right here may not work exactly for you, but we'll kind of give it a shot. But this is a section you generally want to be pretty careful in. So before we change anything, it's seeming like this photo is already a bit on the golden amber side. It was in the afternoon sun comes in pretty yellow. It's beautiful, but in this case it almost seems like a little too much. So first I'm gonna bump up the colors. Vibrance, I usually like to go between 15 and 20. And you can already see that really makes the yellow more noticeable on these flowers, but it also kind of increased that golden hue. So we'll see if we can adjust that later. Saturation can be very dangerous, especially certain colors. But usually I can get away with about 8 or 9. We'll start there for that. Now, again, this background I'm not really too happy with. It's really kind of golden and too green. So we've got these sliders here. Temp lets us choose between more blue or more yellow. Tint allows us to add in more red or add in more green. Especially since it's starting out so yellow, we're going to go blue here. And this isn't just going to affect blue, obviously, because, you know, if you combine blue and yellow, you get green. So bumping this blue, not only did it reduce a bit the yellow, but it also made the green more green, which is pretty nice. I'm not so upset with that green color there. And not always, but generally my preference here is usually if I go towards blue on the temp, then I'll usually go slightly red on the tint. It doesn't always have the effect that you think, like, you know, I'm happy with that green, but it really brought in some nice earth tones back into this here. So that's it for the color section. Usually next I'll skip this effect section. I usually like to do that last, and I'll go to the detail section. Couple things of note about this, other than in very general terms, I don't have the best working knowledge of what exactly these all do, but I know what generally works for me. If I'm editing pictures of people, I tend to not touch this at all. People, you usually don't want to add detail, you usually want to soften things. Otherwise, you really dramatically age them by bringing out all the pores and hairs and wrinkles and everything. And yeah, you're not going to find many fans if you do that too much to your friends' pictures. But for a picture like this, generally what I like to do is a small bump to pretty much everything. As I was explaining earlier, right now it only shows 3 options. But if you notice, there's this little arrow pop down. It's a little different in the mobile version. It'll automatically already show the full menu, but until you adjust the first one, the other 3 may be grayed out. So I'm just going to open all these up. Again, I'm going to bump them all up between about 5 and 10 points. See what works for you. And if you ignore these fields too, it's not the end of the world. So don't worry too much about it. Okay, so I'm going to end there. Give us a little bit of extra details and such, but doesn't overdo it at all. Okay, so the next section we're going to do here is the effects. So these are some of the most important ones, in my opinion, at least. Lighting is probably the most important, you know, the crop obviously, but then lighting and effects really kind of bring you to the final product that you were envisioning in your mind. Texture slider here, if we go far right, we're adding as much detail back in as we possibly can. And basically these are just algorithms built into the program that go in and interpret the picture and add in what it thinks should be there. I never usually recommend going all the way one way or the other. Usually about, you know, halfway between either. You know, so all the way to the left, it pulls out as much texture, and all the way to the right, it adds it in. For this one, it's got all these nice texture in here and here, so we're going to bump that up. Clarity is going to be how clear is it. You know, if it's the petal of a flower really, really close up, do you want to see the dust that could be on it? Do you want to see the veins in something? It is good usually, but sometimes you get more effect by, you know, removing some of the clarity. It can give you a really kind of dreamy effect. As you can see here, I mean, this almost looks like a cartoon or something that was digitally produced. And you can really tell here that it's not really natural looking at this point. And if we go to the other side, it overdoes it, right? It's now looking hyper processed and, you know, photoshopped. Using this program, you do not want stuff to look photoshopped. This is about, you know, bringing the life back into the picture. So try not to overdo it unless that's actually a, you know, vibe or goal that you have for the picture you're working on. So clarity wise, I'm gonna go right about there. Dehaze kind of is gonna bring more darkness and simplicity to your picture. If you go to the right, I'm going to do that right now. Really darkened that background quite a bit and brought the shadows back in here. And if we go the other way, it's going to lighten it a lot. Again, you know, it has a certain feeling like this, but it definitely doesn't look natural. So be careful in your choices. For this picture, somewhere between about here and here. But I want those dark areas to still be noticeable. So I'm going to go on a little bit so that keeps it fairly light. I prefer more darkness here in the surrounding areas to really focus the eye and create drama. But in this case, it's more important, in my opinion, or my preference, to have this visibility. Hey, Scott Aquatics. I'm sorry, guys, I'm not really keeping up on chat too closely. Not many people are chatting, but you know, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll address them as I get to them. Okay, so Vignette. Vignette can make your photos look incredibly professional and also incredibly amateurish. It's all in the execution. So the way that works in Lightroom here is if we go to the right, it's going to add a circular type white area that's going to encroach towards the middle the farther I go. And if I go to the left with the slider, it's going to do that with a dark. Both can be very useful. I generally prefer to use black. White always kind of feels like it's adding more to look at, whereas black is taking it away and drawing the focus. So let's start out here and see how it goes. So I'm really liking how dark it's getting in here. But we need to be careful because we've got detail here we don't want to lose, and we don't want to lose this part of here of the flower, right? That's still our main focus, and that contrast really makes this stand out. So I'm going to say let's stop about there, and then notice there's an arrow here. These will all be available initially, will be showing at least on the mobile version. And pretty much you never want to use Vignette without using these other ones. You'll see why in a minute here. So the next option is going to be the midpoint, and that's going to be how far it pulls it towards the center of the picture. Generally, almost always my Vignette is going to be higher or lower than my midpoint, but it's going to give more of a transition here. And sometimes, you know, like, because I'm losing more and more, I'm going to lower the Vignette a bit here and bring some of that back in, since the midpoint brought that in. It's kind of out of order here. I'm used to feather being the next option down. Feather is the transition from really, really dark to the fade, you know, the fade and the gradient that comes in to where it's not noticeable at all. To the right, it makes it more gradual, and I generally like to go fairly high with that. It's probably can adjust my Vignette a little bit more. And we're still preserving this. This is still a little too dark, but it's not too bad. The next thing I like to do is this roundness setting. So right now it's basically dead middle, meaning it's completely circular, which is nice, but generally it can seem really staged and a lot more noticeable to the eye when it's that perfect circle like that. And generally the things you're taking pictures of and trying to highlight are not going to be circular. I almost never go to the right. I almost always go to the left. And what that's going to do is take it from being a circle to a bit more of like, of course, as I leave the picture on accident. Okay, so let me go back in there, here. Okay. So the roundness, if I come here, it's going to open up the lighting and where that darkness is encroaching. As I was saying, generally you always want to go to the left, and you can kind of see it's becoming almost more squarish as I do that. I think we're going to go about right there, which gives me the highlights in here, which is nice. It's still really dark, but the highlights are helping. And then the last thing that we're going to do for the vignette is the highlights here. And basically any area that is vignetted, this is going to allow you to bring those whites and lighter colors out more. And add, so the vignette's not overtaking them. Which is why, like, here it's really dark, and same thing here, but it almost seems like it's ignoring this part. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm not like super ecstatic about this picture, but I do like it, and I try not to overthink it too much. There's always something else to take a picture of, something else to edit. So when you are ready, look for this little box with the up arrow, the kind of standard share icon, and left click it. And generally, I always want to export it as the highest resolution possible. So I'm going to go full size, quality, I'm going to set to 100, and just make sure everything else here is as you want it. It's generally pretty similar on the phone as far as exporting it. And then you just click export, and it's going to say, where do you want to save it? And go ahead. And then that picture itself is going to be at the best resolution possible. It will be rendered by your phone. It does, if you're editing a lot of pictures on your phone, be warned, it does eat your battery up. But it's not like overly excessive. So yeah, the big advantage and the reason why I usually tell people to use Lightroom is, like, if you use Instagram itself to do your editing, it's very convenient and it is pretty powerful, but you're going to end up with a resolution that is an Instagram resolution. And if I take this picture and post it now to Instagram, it is going to lower the resolution to a standard file size. And then if you ever in the future wanted to print it out or do whatever, you're going to have a lot of issues getting it bigger than, twice the size of how big it is on your phone. So long term, it's usually best to get in the habit of using something like Lightroom. And I think you can even set it up to directly post to Instagram and Facebook and such. But that's not a feature that I use. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. And yeah, Scott's Adobe Lightroom. I'm currently on the PC version. I have a membership for Adobe Creative Cloud. But the version on the phone, which is the one I mainly use, is completely free. So you can get it for Android or iPhone just by going to the store and downloading it. And it has all the same features. And to be honest, there are some things that are paid features in the program, but I very rarely ever use them. They're more for things like selective editing, where if I really wanted only this and this, and I wanted everything in the background to be black, I could go through and highlight it all, and then I could go through and adjust it so that only these areas are being affected. It is useful, but it's totally unnecessary. You can create amazing pictures without it. And once you start using those tools, also, it's a lot harder to keep it looking like something that's not photoshopped. Donald, this was a flower that I took a picture of in Santa Cruz yesterday. I'm not sure the type, but it was really cool and had some nice contrast. But you know, let me see if I have some pictures that you guys, that I can kind of show you like what it looked like before I edited it by undoing it. Oh, here's a good example. Okay, so this is some broccoli that's called Romanesque broccoli. Really cool fractal. And before we chopped it up to have it for dinner, I took some pictures of it. And while this is a cool picture because it has a cool subject matter, it's, you know, distracting, right? You've got all this stuff here, and it just, it's nice, but it's not beautiful. When I was done with this picture, I'm not saying this is beautiful or amazing, but it is a lot nicer to look at, and it looks, I wouldn't say professional, but it looks like something that someone prepared for your eyes to feast on, not just a picture someone snapped to send. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, sharing pictures, unedited pictures is wonderful too. But if you're trying to get that artistic and dramatic look to your pictures, it definitely helps. Let's see. Take care, Donald. You know, here's another good example, right? It's a pretty orchid picture, but it's not really anything to write home about. You know, someone that's into flowers or into orchids, maybe like, wow, that's, you know, an amazing photo. And they're right. It's very cool. But yeah, it's again, it's not presented right. I don't think this is the exact same picture. And it's a little blown out from zooming. Again, it was created for Instagram, so I am not trying to keep it exactly perfect. But you can just really see the difference here, right? And it's not that I made something that didn't exist. I think this one is slightly a little bit more angled. That's why I got the shadows in here versus this one. But it really brought character and drama and made it look more like what I was seeing in real life. Hey, Thirsty Rabbit. And see you later, Candy. Thanks for coming by. So yeah, so I guess, does anyone have any questions? I take a lot of sunrise pictures too. You can kind of see, you know, this is, again, isn't the exact photo, but it was a similar photo. Yeah, the white flowers, Thirsty, those are orchids. These guys here. Let me see if I have anything else. There you go. Here's a good comparison, right? Cool picture, but not like artistically worthy of sharing, right? A little bit of editing, you can do a lot. So Daniel, fish is definitely not a specialty of mine. I do struggle getting good fish pictures. I really haven't spent a lot of time on trying to perfect it, but the things that I know you really are going to want to focus on are shutter speed. You don't want a long exposure because basically you're going to end up with blur. You want it to capture that moment. I know a trick I've used in the past when I get frustrated trying with no luck is taking video in 4K and then going back, and you can, you know, cut out still pictures that are in very high resolution. So then once you frame them and make a picture out of it from the still frame, then you know you have something good to work with. But I would probably point you in Jimmy's direction in terms of recording fish. I will, when I do get a chance to play with that more and get some more ideas of how to make it work better, I'll make sure to let you know. Thirsty, it definitely is super helpful. It doesn't have to be exactly black, but I mean, lighting is everything for photos. I should have said that probably the first thing when the stream started. But yeah, I mean, where the light's coming from, what it's highlighting, where your focus is important. So in terms of, you know, in a fish tank, if things are darker in the background and lighter in the foreground, especially on your subject, you're going to end up with a really beautiful bright colors and lighting on what the eye should be drawn to, and the background should either be soft or dark or muted to not detract from the subject. Another great tip for fish or anything that's alive, well, not alive, but anything that's an animal, is make sure to get the eyes in focus. Always, always, always the eyes. Whether it's a shrimp, a fish, a dog, a person. As people, if the eyes are not in focus, it weirds us out. We don't like it. And I'm sure you've noticed this in pictures that your friends have taken or that you've taken, where it just seems like there's just one little thing. If that eye is in focus, your eyes will forgive most of everything else being out of focus or not being perfectly clear. But if the eye is blurry, it's a real tough to salvage that picture. Anyone else have any other questions, or should we wrap this up? Maybe I think we got about 15 minutes till Joseph's stream starts. Just kind of show off some of the pictures while we're chatting or whatever. Here's another good example, right? Very cool picture. The focus is nice. The lighting is nice. Background, not so much. Little work in Lightroom. Look what you can accomplish. Still a little distracting here, but overall, it allowed me to bump up that rich gold brown and really accent the highlights in the dark areas and bring that blue back into that sky, what it looked like in real life. What's up, Cichlids23? And Daniel, keeping fish, so moving the tank light to the front will maybe help too. Definitely 100%. Even if you normally keep it right in the middle or in the back or wherever, bringing that light or adding a supplemental light with a strong spotlight is going to give you a huge advantage. Again, those colors, that contrast, and you don't always want direct lighting where it's bouncing directly back at you, like you're shining it directly at something and it's bouncing directly back at you, whether that's outdoors, indoors, or whatnot. Play with the angle of the lighting. Sometimes you'll get best effect when it's coming in at an angle from the sun and then bouncing off the object and then coming to you. And that also can go for fish tanks and stuff too. But generally, I would say limit the lighting in the mid and foreground, and get a nice clean spotlight on your subject. Hey, Key Down. Thanks, Thirsty Rabbit. Let me see if I can find some other ones. This isn't the exact photos, okay, but they're close. So I took this picture. It's okay. Took this picture. It's okay. As I was saying earlier, I usually take like 1 to 3 pictures for whatever I'm trying to capture. This one, exposure was kind of high. You can tell it's a bit grainy. This one, the exposure was too low. And this one was just right. It doesn't look that great because I did this on my phone, and I zoomed quite a bit in production, but the lighting was what I was looking for in this picture. And I didn't say it earlier too, but like if you just want to do black and white, it's also very easy in here. I'm not going to really go into depth here, but this kind of cool picture. Let's say I wanted to do black and white. Under color, 2 ways you can do it. You can manually do it by dropping the vibrance and the saturation all the way. One by itself won't do it all. Well, saturation does, but the combination of the 2 is really what you want. But it'll also allow you to do that just coming here and well, it's a little different. On the mobile app, you can also select black and white from pull down menu here. It's a little different on this app, but yeah, that's as easy as it is. Generally, I would recommend, if you do want a black and white photo, skip the lighting section, come to color first, set it to black and white, and then come play with exposure and contrast, right? You really want to be able to see what you're doing and the full effects on that grayscale. But again, I skip right past the cropping. Cropping is definitely what you want to start with. And then there's also straightening in crop. It's a nice little feature. So like if this was a cityscape or a skyline or a landscape where, obviously a horizon should be parallel across the screen, and you didn't capture it right, you can adjust that in here. There is an auto straighten setting in the mobile version that you can just click it, and it usually does a pretty good job. And then you can also adjust it yourself. You can flip it upside down, whatever. You can rotate it, do what you need to. But yeah, cropping is definitely the spot to start. So just to kind of point out, so I think I actually did use a macro lens to take this picture. One thing, if you do ever use those, they're awesome for shrimp pics and, you know, very tiny things. Probably not the best for fast moving things like fish, but they definitely have a use. But you will notice, again, it's an animal, so the eye is the focus. I made sure that that was the exact thing that I got in focus over everything else, which is why this area is so clear, and it matches up with the edge of the shell, which is also why this is clear. But the most important thing was that eye. We would totally notice if the eye wasn't in focus. You know, this is blurry, doesn't look great, especially here, right? Something's off in this picture, even if you don't necessarily know what it is. Just to show you the importance of that. I mean, I could show this to pretty much any person, and if they knew what they were looking at and they were being honest, would say something's just not right. And that's what it is. It looks like the focus hit this part of the antenna here, which is also the same plane as this part of the shell and closer than the eye. So we got stuff in focus, but not what we wanted. Hey, GK. So I'm going to wrap it up, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or any feedback. Oh, last thing I was going to show you. So this is that picture that we started on with the eye in focus. One thing to notice, because this is using a macro lens, everything outside of that very close plane that's in focus is blurry. And the lens itself does that. So that's one of the big disadvantages. Usually, you know, when you're doing a macro, it's really important just for one specific area. But, you know, if you're using it, like if I'm taking flower pictures, I may want some of those other details. So something to keep in mind for sure. So 23, bait your shrimp to the front of the tank. Make sure you have good lighting on them. And that's your best bet, because that's kind of one of the frustrating things of using a camera phone over a real camera, I should say. You only, like phone cameras can focus further away, but it becomes more difficult to get precise with it. If it's really, really up close, like if it's near the front of the glass and the camera is a couple inches from the glass, that's your kind of your best bet. But because it's an aquarium and you can't keep moving towards it, the subject, to kind of force it to get in focus what you want, it can be more challenging. But you can also use lighting tricks if it's further away. But I definitely would say, you know, feed something near the front of the tank. That's usually what I'll do if I want to take pictures or if I'm streaming from my shrimp tank. And yeah, iPhone 8 can still take some amazing pictures. You know, and I believe the Note 8 as well. I mean, anything, if it's if it's 3 years or so old or less, not even a strict cutoff there, but just in general, you can take some really nice pictures. If it's, you know, not a generic phone, if it's a Samsung or an iPhone or, you know, LG or anything that's like just not a cheap knockoff version, you should be able to take some nice pictures. And again, the program I'm using, Adobe Lightroom, it is free from the app stores, both for Android and iPhone. The desktop version does require a subscription. but it's totally unnecessary. I have it on both, and I usually prefer to do it on my phone. But yeah. All right, so we got 3 minutes till Joseph. Let's see if I can grab that link for everyone. Thanks for tuning in and checking out the stream. Hope everyone got something out of it. Kind of long overdue, but yeah, figured even a little bit of unscripted walking through my process might help everyone out. Nice, Scots. Yeah, the new iPhones are great. I've never used them. I have an iPhone XR, which is great. I mean, it could be better, but I mean, I'm super happy with what I'm able to get out of it. And to be honest, I get a lot of questions asking what my camera setup is, and people are usually kind of surprised to find out I don't use a camera. I just use my iPhone. Oh, and real quick before we end it, in terms of video, I know this opinion isn't standard, but personally, I use 4K. And if storage is an issue, then 1080p, but at 60 frames per second is well worth it. It'll be much more smooth, and you can always downgrade it later. But if you start out with 4K, you can even zoom in video later, take amazing still pictures from the video. If you have enough space to work with it and you are going to use those features, it's well worth doing, just hands down. But it does make for some very large photo sizes or file sizes. So even if you don't do 4K, and if you have the option, do 1080p at 60 frames per second. It's a nice little compromise between 4K and 1080. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you all later. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll try to keep this posted.